Hello and welcome to the Alpha Software Demo and Q&A webcast. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Product here at Alpha Software. Before we begin today, I always want to do a quick audio visual check. If there's someone here, I just want to make sure that you can hear me and that you could see my screen, see my mouse move around on the screen as well. Yeah, excellent, fantastic, thank you. So for those of you who have questions that I said I'd get back to you on and I haven't gotten back to you on, thank you for your patience. I will get back to you very, very shortly. I have been actually busy preparing. We were selected the Alpha Transform for the MIT CIO Technology Symposium, which we attended earlier this week. It was very exciting. We were a finalist in this event and got to see a lot of really interesting technology and stuff like that. So look for an upcoming blog post all about that event, but it was kind of a neat thing to be represented there. So today's episode has to do with APIs. I was working with a colleague of mine a few days ago, and he said, okay, listen, I just want to get some data into my application from an API. In this case, it was a payment processing API. I said, okay, well, Alpha can do that. So just go in and create an XBasic code module for your application. And then you can invoke the Genie that you can use for the API wizard. And that allows you to both create APIs so that people can consume data and services that you have running, as well as consume API data from third-party services like payment processors and artificial intelligence places, OCR services, all kinds of great things you can do with APIs. And I had realized in the past that we had spoke mostly about building out APIs in Alpha Transform. So I thought it would be a really good time to come back and revisit the consumption of data using APIs in Alpha Software. So this is probably going to go over a couple of sessions, not just today, but I wanted to start with, actually, it was a really good foundation that Dion McCormick had done for us. Dion, no relation, but Alpha expert that many of you know, had done for us in a previous video. So I'm going to be showing that video today, and we're going to then take what we've learned next week, and we're going to go even further. We're even going to get into a little bit of .NET and some other stuff as well. So let's get started. First, let me check to see if there are any questions. Here we go, wonderful. So let's go ahead and get started. My normal warning before I play a video is that sometimes the video is louder than my voice now. So if you're wearing headphones, just be careful. As I start the video, it might be loud. Okay, here we go. All right, and away we go.
As Dave mentioned, I have a quick presentation today talking about APIs. APIs obviously continue to grow as far as the dominant architectural structure of most modern systems. Not only are great companies being developed where they're really just an API that people use, things like Twilio, behind there is you're really accessing everything through an API to access their services. But also internally in a lot of companies, they've moved to an API-centric form so that it's easier and faster for them to adapt to business conditions, adapt to opportunities, and overall make it easier to maintain technology and morph it, migrate it, improve it over time in a safe and effective way. So what's neat about this is that Alpha embraced that very early on, and there's a full suite of API tools that are built into the system, not only producing APIs, but also consuming APIs. Now, we've focused a lot about producing APIs using Alpha, which is really easy to do. And in fact, we had a presentation a little while ago about how you can even develop a more modern GraphQL structured API with some built-in tools with just point and click kind of scenarios. So that is a really fun presentation. It's a month or two back, and it's very interesting technology because it's sort of the next iteration of basically how people are building applications that go forward from there. Sorry, a little sneeze there. So today, I want to do a real quick recap on and talk about how you can consume REST services. So there's multiple ways in Alpha for you to be able to do that. All of these are ready out of the box kind of solutions. They're capable. Some are already pre-built. Also, you can create your own custom implementations. And I kind of wanted to walk you through and show you the different options that are available and what the pros and cons of each of them, and how it can really produce a situation where your system becomes easier to maintain, faster to modify, and bulletproof as far as implementation from there. So I'm going to cover really quickly just a recap on using what's called curl to XBasic, and then we're going to run into something that is neater that actually allows you to build a structure of a API service or REST service, and it provides some benefits I'll talk to as I go through the demonstration there. So in order to do this, I went ahead and whipped up a simple API structure. And what I'm going to do is, where is my Postman? Where's Postman? There it is. Okay. So first, just to kind of talk about them, and I'll go ahead and let's go ahead and just put these here. I'm going to grab these and put that in the chat just so you see them, just in case you want to try and replicate it there. There, okay. What I'm using here is Postman, and I'm not sure if people are familiar with Postman, but if you're doing any kind of API work, it's something very easy. It's a nice tool, very powerful tool, and it's actually kind of becoming the industry standard for how people kind of play with, test, identify, and put things together as it. And one of the key features that is really neat about Postman is after you get an API working with all the different features such as authentication, headers, all those kind of things, it makes it easier for you to generate some sample code that you can use in different systems, much like Alpha does internally, but I'm mainly going to do it so I can show you some curl commands and stuff like that. So here are two APIs. One is a very simple API, this one right here, where it's a get API, meaning all we're going to do is call the server and the server is going to bring data back. And again, if you go back to our previous presentations, we show you how you can essentially create these things automatically in Alpha by pointing and clicking. I mean, you can basically say, create an API by calling this database and returning data in a JSON format. Super duper easy and simple to do. So this, when you call this endpoint, it just basically gives you some user interface. There's no options or anything else. It's just really simple. So if I put in this, and you could even put this in your browser and say send, and it generates it and brings back some customer data here. There's a second API I just whipped up really quickly. It's basically, this one allows you to get the information for an individual user. So you'll notice each user has an ID and then some information that's associated with it. So I went ahead and I go, let's say I want to have an ID. I can say, give me the user for number 3, send it, and it brings back the information just for that one user here. And these are very simplistic kind of APIs, but I wanted to focus more on the process on the Alpha side and less on the complexity of the API. But do note, if you had security and other aspects that are associated with it, the Alpha sort of REST API generators and stuff can handle them with no problem at all. So let's first start talking just a little bit about a built-in capability in Alpha called curl to XBasic. So I'm not sure if you know about curl. We've talked about it in the past, but what curl is basically a C program that runs on all environments, Macs, PCs, etc. And it is essentially a command line that will allow you to call a web service, whether it's a website or an API endpoint. So you can basically just write a little curl command, and what it does is it calls that server and brings the data back, and then allows you to manipulate and use that data. It's really handy because then you don't even need to use a tool like this if you don't want. You can just use curl, and it's more of a command line environment. But Alpha has full support for curl within the solution. In fact, when you install Alpha, either on the development or the server side, it installs the curl command, so it's available in both environments for you to do really cool stuff with it. So as I mentioned with Postman, I can go over here, and you'll see Postman has the ability to generate little code snippets for any kind of sort of development environment. So if you were doing stuff in PHP, it would write you the PHP code to basically call this endpoint and get this data back. If you were using something like Node.js, this is how you would do it. Let's say you were using something like Python. This is how we'd use it. And there's different variants to it, so it's available. And one thing about this Python is all of this code works great within Alpha's Python module support capability. So if you have something a little more sophisticated, it may be easy just to grab Python and implement it that way. But I'm going to go up here and you'll see one of them is called curl. And this is basically the curl command, which is the essentially the same thing as putting this in and calling and getting the data down. So I primarily just showing this because it's really nice to test stuff. Like if you want to just make sure your APIs are working good, you can put in different points here, run it right in here. You don't have to write any code, command lines, it runs, it shows you the results here, and you're able to do it from there. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my curl command here. So I'm going to copy that. And now I'm going to jump into my Alpha environment. So there we go. Okay, I'm going into Alpha here. Oops, that's not. This is Alpha here. So first, I'm going to go into XBasic and create a new XBasic script. Just to, this script could either be in an XBasic class and a function. It could be actually in UX. Anywhere you have XBasic on this white space, there are a whole series of commands, genies you can get by right-clicking on it. So even if you had a UX, you could right-click on it and then go to genies and all of these capabilities. And these are really just nice little code generators. So you don't have to sit there and write a whole bunch of code. So one that I like and what I like to introduce is here is the curl command to XBasic. Basically, this allows you to take any curl command and it will turn it into a set of XBasic, including any things like security and other elements that are associated with it. So you just go into wherever you want to put this. Again, it could be an XBasic function, a class, or your UX. You just right click on the white space, go to code library, genies, curl command XBasic, and it brings this up here. So you'll see we can basically do a couple things. So this form basically allows you to insert a curl command here and generate the XBasic. But also it's got a bunch of sort of samples that you can get here. Now again, since I'm using Postman, it's kind of written for me, but this is really handy if you're not as familiar with curl. It gives you some information there. So I'm going to go ahead and paste this here, and then I'm going to generate the XBasic. Runs a little command, and then boom, now here is my XBasic information. So I can copy this information to clipboard, and then I can paste it here, and now I have a XBasic command, and it takes care of all the things about like CA path, customer request, all these things that normally are little nits and gnats, but you don't have to worry about it. So let's go ahead and run that, and you'll see, aha, it gives me two things back. And this is the only thing that you kind of got to get your head on around in this, is that when you run this code, it actually gives you two things: the header information, because sometimes it's important to get the header information back from a call, and then the actual content, which is right here. You'll notice that is equivalent to this information right here. But you'll notice how fast I was able to write this XBasic. I didn't have to figure it all out. I just put it in. Now I can focus on, oh, okay, here is like the header information. Here's the content information. I can extract that from contents. It automatically puts the information into variables for me. And then I could take this and turn it into a pointer variable or update a database, anything I wanted to do from that. Or if this is running in UX, I could take this contents and then send it to the UX as field data or updating, say, a view box or something along those lines. But the benefit of this is that you don't have to spend a lot of time writing code. You can basically get your curl command and go from there. Now, one thing that's cool about curl is that if you look at a lot of out of the world, like let's go here, let's go Twilio API reference or documentation. And I think they have this. I haven't checked this, but let me check this, make sure. We'll go to the API reference, SMS, and there. So often what they'll do is notice in the documentation here, it gives you a curl command. So if you're trying to figure out, like for instance in Twilio, oh, I want to send this message. It actually right here in the documentation, and most people are going to standardize this because they want to make programmers to make their life easier. You'll see over here it says curl. I just copy this curl command, go into my Alpha environment, go to your white space, and then say genie curl command XBasic, paste it here. Now it may give, and then here is my call, and this is the information how to do it, and it shows like how to set up the options, like for instance, the user password, that kind of information here. But you'll notice I didn't have to spend a lot of time. I basically went to the documentation, found a curl representation of what I wanted to do, come into Alpha, paste it right here, and I'm off to races there. So the curl command X basic is super duper duper handy if you want to do it. Now, the thing about it is that, often you're just not using a single API from a system. So for instance, if you'll notice this is a single X basic that allows you to, basically this is a single curl command to do something, but there's a whole bunch of other, in their case, tons of different Twilio endpoints to do other things like call and get updates or do other things or set settings, etc. So you could go through each one of those, create a XBasic class, and then set all these things up and do that. But there's probably a better, more effective way to do this, and especially if you're using a simpler XBasic or a simpler API. And that's a neat tool I'd like to show you next. But before I just want to do a status check, see if there's any questions about this information, and make sure my audio video is coming through okay and everything's working pretty copacetic.
Audio and video are coming in just fine. There are no questions right now on API stuff, although we will have a few general questions after.
No problem. I'll continue. So there is a different way that you can actually consume or create a structure to consume REST services. So remember, my REST service in this case has two endpoints. One is get a list of users, and another one get a single user. And let's say I want to, and maybe this could have 5, 10, 20, like update a user or delete a user or do all those kind of things there. Whatever your application is, you could have many, many endpoints that are available that you've developed. So you kind of want to wrap that into something that makes your life easier. Well, Alpha has a really cool tool that allows you to set up and build what's called a REST API service to consume data. So we've gone over the REST API provider, where you basically can take your built-in class functions here and expose them as an API. So you're taking data out of the Alpha system and exposing it, or exposing functionality to there. So we've done work on that, and that's really nice. But now the alternative is I want to now create an API service that consumes data from a third-party service. So I've already created one here, but I'm going to walk you through how to do this, and we'll walk through pulling this up and show you a demonstration of it. And the benefit of this is that instead of you having to create an XBasic class and structure all this kind of does a lot of that, call it administrivia work for you, so your life is a lot simpler. So I'm going to go ahead and I am going to create a new, so I'm in the web services area over here. So not XBasic, I'm in the web services area here. And I'm going to go ahead and click new. Now I have a number of different options when this comes up. We've mainly focused on creating a new definition. That's what created this AmWorks API kind of stuff there. But also we can create a new definition to create a GraphQL. That's that presentation I did like a month or two ago that talked about how you could use GraphQL to basically create a GraphQL service, which is a more modern way to provide data. But you'll see a couple of one. SOAP is still out there. You're going to run into it, especially with legacy environments, etc. But it's becoming less and less kind of used. REST is really where it's at. And you'll see here you have create a new definition to consume a REST service. And this will call a REST service from your XBasic code, make life easier from there. And again, one thing I want to show you real quick is that, when you do this, it generates a lot of code here and can get confusing over time and stuff like that. You have a lot of control, but this will actually simplify your life a lot from there. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new one. I'm going to click here for create a new definition, and I'm going to call this webinar API. You can call it anything you want. Now I'm going to create a custom one, but here's the cool thing. There are two different ways to do this. There's actually three ways. One is what I show you today, where I kind of do it custom, but there's also a new two other ways to do it. One is called import Swagger. Now, Swagger is a industry standard sort of way to describe APIs. So the cool thing about that is that if for whatever reason you're connecting to a third party and they have a Swagger, or now it's called Open API definition, you merely have to import it and it will do all this building for you. So it's actually faster and more effective than you doing it yourself. So that's one way, and that's highly recommended. And a lot of people have moved that way because it's an industry standard. The other way is to import a Google service. So we already have a whole bunch of Google services already pre-ready to go that we've already put together. And I know that Sari has already gone through it, so I'm not going to go through all that stuff. But you know, as you can see, they have tons of services that are available: games, groups, let's see, manage identities. Who knows? Oh, you know, it's like crazy all over it. So this is a whole bunch of stuff that's already been pre-built, so you don't have to worry about it. So if you're trying to connect to Google, it's already done. We've done a lot of the lifting for you, so you don't have to worry about that. But in this case, I'm going to create a empty one because I kind of want to walk you through how this works so you understand the concept. So I'm going to click create. So that now will open up and bring open a new screen as soon as it finishes talking. So it opens up basically a command line thing that allows you to walk through and put together what your service looks like. So the first thing you're seeing is what's called a resource URL. And if we go back to Postman, where's Postman? Right here, you're going to see that if you notice between these two APIs, everything up to here is the same. So it goes blah, 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 underscore API, same thing, underscore API. And so you see those two little things right there. So this, in this case, is your service URL. It's the front end thing that you always use. And then the thing after it here, like in this case, user, or in this case, user one, is sort of the action that you can take on this service. So I'm going to take the first part of it and I'm going to copy it. Go ahead and copy that. Go in here and in the resource URL, I'm going to paste it there. So now I have our resource URL. It says, where's that top level endpoint? And then we can then create a called actions, which are sort of the children of that, sort of like the different things you want to do from there. And we're going to do two of them. If you notice, there's two different things that are about this. One, this just calls an endpoint, but there's no parameters that go with it. You just do it. It's going to always give you whatever it gives you. But you'll notice in this one, we actually have a parameter here that we need to pass to it, which is the ID of the person. And you need to, you know, basically call that, provide the ID. So that is a variable. So we need to tell our service about that variable part. So we're going to keep it simple. We're going to start with this users here. So as I said, this is that resource URL. And now we have users, and I'm going to copy that as the action. So now if we go back in here, and we're going to go ahead, we've got our resource URL. By the way, this provider and other pieces there, if you have a lot of security and other elements, and I'm not going to go in today, but Alpha has a whole way of managing that data, so you don't have to worry about it, again, beyond the scope of today. But that's what you'd be selecting here as your providers that you've set up to be able to basically pass security data in to say, hey, you know, I need to hit this endpoint and do things from there. So I'm going to go to actions down here, and you'll notice there's two things here called schemas and actions. Schema is sort of like, it helps me understand what the data is coming back, both the data that's passed and coming back. Action is the actual action, and we'll explore that a little bit more in a few moments here. So remember, if you've got Swagger, you just have to say, import that Swagger definition, and it will automatically create all of this for you, because that's what's in that document is your definition of how it works. But nice thing is Alpha goes ahead and generates that for you as you go through the process. And in fact, after you've done it, or after you've completed it, you can export your own Swagger definition and hand it to people to make their lives easier. So it's really cool. It's almost a round trip kind of scenario. So I'll go add action. So I'm going to call this action get users, and you can call this anything you want. The path. Now the path is that last part of the URL. So in this case, users. In this case, it's going to be user one. So I'm going to go back here. Yep, right here. Sorry. I'm going to say path, the users. Now method is important. In my case, my ones are get, but if you're posting or putting data or deleting, you may have a different method here depending on how your API is architected. So in our case, it's a get. Now this is kind of neat here, is that we can just go ahead and test this. So I can click test and test the endpoint. And oh, I might have to do the wrong one here. I think I get this one a little confused here. And then I go in here and let's try this, edit the action again, test. There we go. So let me explain that just so you know there. So you'll notice at the end of API here, this is without anything after it. So if you look in the full definition, after that, there is a / and the endpoint itself. So in this case, a / in users, in this case, a /. So when you're building, and this was tricky, is that when you put in the resource URL, do not put that /. When you create your action, put in that /. And that's just, you saw it couldn't resolve it because it was confused. When you do this now, and it's probably set up, you can see when I run this test, it's going to bring back the information that I need from there. Now, one thing that's also cool is when I save this, you'll notice something that it's already edited that action and it's ready to go. So really, I've got that action ready to go and we're good to go. I can export that to Swagger or continue using it from there. So I'm going to click save. And now you'll notice it created a new web service called Webinar API REST API. So now I've done my work to essentially set up and tell Alpha, how do I get access to those services? And you'll see in a few moments, how do we also provide it, variables to pass in or to pass into that from there. So now I can go back to XBasic. Actually, I'll say right here, I'll go to XBasic. Very similar to XBasic. Once I've done that kind of homework, then I can right click here, go to my genies. Instead of curl command XBasic, I can do what's called a REST reference call. And so it will access my REST reference. So in my case, remember it's Webinar API, but check this out. I want to let you know, Alpha's already done a whole bunch of work on Dropbox, Spotify, Twilio, Twitter, YouTube, etc., where all of this is already pre-built. So again, if one of these systems, especially like Dropbox or something you try to connect to, don't worry about creating your own structure. It's already been done and kind of built into the system. But in my case, I have a Webinar API that I created. So you'll notice here is my service, and over here is that action, get users. And here is the code to call that. So I'm going to copy that example, click OK, and it's going to paste it right in here. So as you can tell, that's a little bit cleaner than the XBasic curl, meaning once you've done all that a lot of that behind the scenes code is kind of wrapped in something called a REST reference. And so you can see right here, it creates an object of your REST reference, dims a result, and let's go ahead and run that. And you can see, voila. So notice, even nicer, I didn't have to get like headers and everything else. It just provides me that information back, that result that I'm looking for. So as you can see, if you were to put this in a UX or something like that, you're talking about a lot less code that's necessary to perform the same work. So again, XBasic curl, great, use it, works great. Our curl to XBasic, phenomenal. But if you're going to do something a little more sophisticated, especially when you're starting to pass parameters and stuff, then this is the way to go. Okay, so that's really how you generate it, but let's go ahead and take it up to the next level. Let me go back into my REST reference. I'm going to edit that. And let's go ahead and now look at how do we throw in parameters. So remember, I've got the same endpoint here, i.e. the reference URL here, but I also want to pass in, and I've got this variable called really the ID of the person that's associated with it. So you hit 3, etc., etc. By the way, if you hit 4 and it doesn't exist, you get a null back. So you'll actually see, no, there's nobody by ID number 4. So now let's go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and grab this part right here, because remember, when I create my action, I want to grab that / and everything after it, and not worrying right now of what all the pieces are. I'm just grabbing everything from the reference URL after it. So I run over here. I say I want to add a new action, and I'm going to call that user. I'm just going to call it, let's call it get user. And here is the path. Okay. Now you'll notice this number 2 is your special parameter that you're going to pass in. So you'll notice down below, you have what's called add parameters. So if I want to take this 2 from hard-coded and go from there, I click add parameter, and it tells me, it's asking, is it a query or a path parameter? In this case, it's a path. Query would be like the classic question mark ID equals this. And this supports both of them. So if you have a query structure versus what's called a path, we'll do that. But I'm going to click path. And this path is called, we'll call it ID. And it's a string. And then up here, you basically put in ID. Let me see if this actually, that's what it does. Very cool. Okay, let me show you how this works right here. Actually, let me take a step back. I'm sorry, there's an easier way to do that than what I did. So I'm going to add my new action. Bear with me. I'm going to go ahead and call it get user. I'm going to paste in that path there, and then I'm going to click these little 3 ellipsis button. And you'll notice that path here. So wait, did I do that one? Oh, I guess I'll have to do it here. Okay. Then I'm just going to go like here and put ID because I want to pass that in and click OK. No, that's not working. That one didn't. It's not query command. Let's try this. Yeah. Oh, well, I guess it is the other way. I thought it was an easier way, but I'm just create a path one, and I'm going to go ahead and edit that. I'm going to call that ID, and then up here you just put in the path, open parentheses, close parentheses, and now you have a path-based variable. So let's go ahead and let's edit that action. So you'll see we've got get user. Here's the path ID. We can test it. It's asking me for what my ID is there. So we'll put in 1 and oh, why is it? Let's try this here. Let's see if I did it right. Oh, there's no slash. There it is. So I need to have that slash in front of it. I'm sorry, everybody. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. So basically I have my path. I put in ID there. Now, when I go to test, I put in the value there. Notice that it's building that up. That looks right. So let's test the endpoint and the data comes back. So little touchy, but I think the key thing I keep screwing up is you got to make sure you have that / so that when it builds this command, you'll notice that it's building the path together. And again, if this was like, question jar ID, ID equals X, you can use both. This is called a path variable, but you could also use query vehicles there. So let's go ahead and save this. Obviously, if I just screwed it up. Yep, that's all good. Okay, now I'll go back here and now watch. Again, the payoff is after you do that work, you just go to Genie's REST reference call. I'm going to click Webinar API. So you notice I'm starting to build basically a library, a definition of that. And you'll notice that I'm going to say get user, and I'm going to copy that and put it in here. Now, you'll notice something interesting here. It's sort of similar, but you'll see that there's a command here called args_id because we're going to pass in that argument. So I'm going to go ahead and uncomment that, and I'm going to go args.id is equal to 3. So this is basically that little ID we put into the path. So now I can set the argument for it. It runs. And there we go, ID number 3, first name Sally Jones. I can change this ID right here, run it, and there. So the tricky part is just getting it set up. And again, if you have a Swagger definition, your life will be much easier because it defines all of the parameters and everything else associated with it, makes your life really simple. In my case, you kind of have to write it, but once you get a feel for it, once you get the hook of where those slashes are, you're good to go. But I think the most important thing is that this dramatically simplifies your code and puts a lot of the complexity behind the scenes that Alpha is writing perfect code to be able to handle it. So you don't have to worry about a lot of the nuances and stuff. Basically, it becomes very straightforward to you to be able to use this, and you're off to the races here. So that is the 2 methodologies. One is the XBasic or XBase to curl command XBasic. Again, works great, but generates a lot of code. Here, what you can do is you can go into your service definition. You could define all these things. You can even add a schema, which is pretty cool. And what a schema does is basically defines what exactly your result will look like, because then it understands not only how to call the service, but how the service comes back. So let's give that a try. I just want to experiment, so if you guys are okay with that. So I'm going to copy this information here. This is what comes back from it. So I'd like to have a schema on that. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to add a schema. I'm going to call that a user schema. And I'm going to go ahead and import it, put it right there. Oops, nope, that didn't catch right. Copy that. Let's go back here. Let's go ahead and go back into import. There you go. Notice what it did. It actually took your JSON or XML, and actually XML is much more difficult, so it's much nicer in this situation. It automatically figured out, oh, this is a number and this is a string. This is your schema right here. So now I've got my schema called user. I can preview it, and then you could paste some data and it would show you and save it here. So now I have not only a get user, but a schema that says what is the structure of the data that comes back. Let's go ahead and just for giggles, let's try users. Let's go ahead and see what that does just for interest here. And I haven't tried it, so I'm going to take my user repeat data. I'm going to go in here. I'm going to add a schema, and I'm going to call it users. And I'm going to import it, paste it. Oops, I didn't like that. I didn't copy it. That's the problem. Okay, copy. Come back here. Paste it. And again, it knows there. Click OK. So it just determines what the fields are in your items there. So now we have users. Save it. Let's go back here and let's generate that code again. Code library, Genie, REST reference call. Let's go ahead and go to webinar API, get user. Okay. And what's nice is that if you are using schemas, when it returns it, it'll actually put it into a structure that's easy, so it understands how to do it there. Again, you have your input arguments here, but you can also improve that. Let's see, I want to check something else. I thought I brought the schema in. Let me try this real quick. Oh, I think I might have missed a step. Just to let you know, is I think what I need to do is when I have that schema extends, now somehow I link it to there. This is kind of the limit where I went on there, so we're good to go. But the benefit is the code that you write now is much cleaner, easier, and those schemas, especially when you're submitting data to a endpoint, it can actually make sure the data is structured correctly using the schema. So you can use the schema to define your data, and then it turns it into JSON that submits to the service, and therefore you can make sure it's perfectly correct. So you don't have to write a bunch of authentic or auditing code and other things. It just works really nice from there. So, oops, wrong one. Genie, REST reference, webinar, users. There you go. So you can see I've got my different ones that are available to use. I'm also note you can also have different types of generation, recursing. If you have like recursive calls, nested, uncommented, etc. Very straightforward, easy to use there. So that is called the web service, a REST service. It allows you to consume REST services. It allows you to put a structure around that so that the code is generated cleanly and works great. Also, you can use these schemas to make sure the data that you submit to an endpoint is going to be correct. Thus, you don't have to worry about it. It kind of structures it for you. And then also, we have a bunch of out-of-the-box solutions for Dropbox, Google, Twilio, etc., Twitter, that are really nice for you to be able to use. Again, you don't have to import things. You don't have to create it. It's already there. It's available there. So that's just a quick overview of the API capabilities in terms of if you're calling APIs and consuming data. It is a little work up front versus just generating curl statements and generating XBasic, but you're well rewarded in terms of cleaner code, stability, easier to read, easier to manage, and over time maintain. Because if like the endpoint creates a new, like let's say you have a service and it creates a couple new services or actions, endpoints, you can just go in and modify and add those to your definition. Boom, it's all ready to go. And then your code can take advantage of those endpoints and actions from there.
All right. Well, I hope that laid a pretty good foundation for consuming APIs in Alpha Anywhere. Next week, we're going to go a little bit further into the subject. We're going to talk about schemas and actually get the thing to work that Dion was not able to show you today. Again, just a quick reminder, just thank you for your patience. If you've been waiting for questions to be answered, we had a little bit of a backlog as we were preparing for an event, but that backlog will be cleared shortly. So do keep those questions coming into guides, GUIDES at alphasoftware.com. So that is it for today. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Again, if you have questions, you know where to send them. We'll be back here next Wednesday as we continue on our Alpha Software demo and Q&A series. Until then, take care and stay well. Bye-bye.